For that rain ban, it will be a fairly cool afternoon to come, but look at these temperatures across England and Wales, widely into the high 20s or low 30s. In the southeast, we could see 33 or 34 degrees, which is fairly exceptional for this stage in June. So as we end the day on a bright, hot note for many areas, we pick up on that cloud and rain that will continue to sink its way southwards across into central parts of England and Wales. To the north of it, we're in the fresher air, so 1 or 2 showers, quite a breezy conditions across the far north as well. Here it will be comfortable for sleeping, but look at these temperatures in the southeast, not dropping below 19, possibly 20 degrees, which really will be very warm and humid for those trying to sleep. So we start Saturday on a fairly cloudy note across the central slice of the UK into Wales and central England as well. And through the day, an increasing chance of some showery rain developing. To the north of it, fresher with some sunshine, still hot in the southeast though. Gradually turning unsettled for all areas as we head into the weekend, with outbreaks of rain clearing to fresher conditions for all.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
A very good afternoon and welcome to the Briefing PM, an hour of the latest political news, debate and analysis here on GB News. I'm Darren McCaffrey and here's what's coming up over the next hour between now and 4. Interest rates are set to rise further after the Bank of England jacked them up to 1.25%. We'll get the latest analysis from our economics editor Liam Halligan of what it means for you at home and indeed for your mortgage rates. The Housing Secretary Michael Gove is publishing new plans to ban no-fault evictions and boost other powers for renters. Does it go far enough? One of the latest from Westminster. Meanwhile, Russia has sanctioned some of the UK's top journalists. But just how dangerous is it to be a journalist in Russia right now? We'll be speaking to an expert on that matter. And rail car chaos is set to hit the nation next week. We're speaking to Conservative MP Greg Smith on whether a deal can be reached, whether the government wants a deal, or whether in the end, actually, they want to see the unions go ahead with this strike. As always, do get in touch with your views. You know the email address by now, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet at gbnews. All that and so much more between now and 4. But first, at the top of the hour, let's get the very latest news.
Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 3. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The government has published the resignation letter from Boris Johnson's former ethics advisor and the Prime Minister's response. In his letter, Lord Geidt, who left his position suddenly yesterday, says, "I was tasked to offer a view about the government's intention to consider measures which risk a deliberate and purposeful breach of the ministerial code. This request has placed me in an impossible and odious position." The idea that a Prime Minister might to any degree be in the business of deliberately breaching his own code is an affront. I can have no part in this. In response, Boris Johnson called the resignation a surprise and says he'd been seeking Lord Geidt's advice in the national interest in protecting a crucial industry. He's the second ethics advisor to resign under the Prime Minister in 3 years. Shadow Attorney General Emily Thornberry says it's clear there's an issue at Downing Street.
To lose one advisor on ethics may be seen to be unfortunate, but to lose two shows that there is something really rotten at the heart of Downing Street. You know, we don't need a new ethics advisor. What we need is a new Prime Minister.
The Bank of England has increased interest rates from 1% to 1.25% as the cost of living continues to soar. It's the fifth consecutive rise, pushing interest rates to the highest level in 13 years. The bank warned prices for households may increase even further than expected and that inflation could reach above 11% in October. Oscar-winning actor Kevin Spacey can return to the US after being granted unconditional bail over charges of sexually assaulting 3 men. The 62-year-old faced 4 counts of sexual assault and 1 count of causing a person to engage in sexual activity without consent. His lawyer told Westminster Magistrates Court his client strenuously denies all and any criminality. Mr. Spacey will next appear at Southwark Crown Court on the 14th of July. The General Secretary of the RMT Union has accused the Transport Secretary of disgraceful threats to rail workers' livelihoods and right to strike. Mick Lynch says Grant Shapps should stop focusing on his own political ambitions and help reach a negotiated settlement on the dispute over jobs and pay. His comments follow Mr. Shapps calling next week's industrial action an incredible act of self-harm. Rail workers are staging a 3-day walkout on the 21st, 23rd and 25th. Tenants will be given more powers to challenge poor practices and unjustified rent increases by their landlords. That's as part of the government's new deal for private renters in England. The publication of a new government white paper today will also end blanket bans on families with children and those on benefits. The measures will form part of the Renters Reform Bill, which aims to redress the balance between landlords and privately renting households across England. Freddie Poser, director of Priced Out, says there needs to be more building of homes across the country. Specialist rape courts are being set up as part of a trial in England to try and improve conviction rates for sexual offences. The government says court staff and police will receive specialist training. Advisors will also be on hand for victims. The pilot scheme will be rolled out in Leeds, Newcastle and Snaresbrook Crown Courts, each with a dedicated courtroom for dealing with rape cases. The Prime Minister's official spokesman says continued crossings of the English Channel in small boats has showed the need for the Rwanda policy. It says the Ministry of Defence confirmed 233 people reached the coast of Kent on half a dozen small boats yesterday. A GB News producer says at least 80 people have been picked up in 2 boats today. And archaeologists working on an HS2 site have discovered a burial ground containing nearly 140 graves. The site in Wendover, Buckinghamshire, is one of the largest Anglo-Saxon burial grounds ever uncovered in Britain. One skeleton was found with an iron object embedded in its spine, which experts believe may have contributed to their death. Items from the 5th and 6th centuries were also found, including brooches, amber beads and knives. This is news. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now back to the briefing with Darren.
It is 7 minutes past 3 o'clock on this Thursday afternoon. We're on TV, online and on your DAB digital radio. Thank you very much indeed for your company watching the briefing here on GB News. Going to start off with politics if we can, because Boris Johnson's ethics advisor, as you just saw in the news bulletin, Lord Geidt, resigned last night. His letter was issued today. He resigned, he said, after being put in an impossible and odious position when it comes to the risk of breaking the ministerial code. In his resignation letter, he said that he could have no part of this. Now, he had, in that letter, suggested that he could have resigned over Partygate, but actually the issue he seems to resign on was on a trade issue. Let's get more on all of this. Let's go to Tom Harwood, our political correspondent, who is, as you can see, at Westminster for us. Tom, just clear up here. What is going on? Because it doesn't seem like he's resigned over Partygate. He's resigned over an entirely different issue that's not entirely clear.
Yes, it might not seem like that. However, a lot of people have been tempted to read between the lines of this letter. If Lord Geidt had wanted to be seen to resign over Partygate, he had plenty of opportunities to do it over the last 6 months. The reason why he didn't, well, I suppose that's open to interpretation. However, the reason that he gave for resigning is he says the Prime Minister asked him to advise over a matter that the Prime Minister knew would breach the ministerial code. The former ethics advisor of the Prime Minister says that knowingly breaching the ministerial code is a step too far, is why he is resigning over this issue. However, from Downing Street's side of things, that's not at all what they were asking. Downing Street say they were asking Lord Geidt whether or not an action to protect what we understand to be the British steel industry would be in breach of the ministerial code. Now, there's an argument that says certain actions to protect the British steel industry may be in contravention of one or two lines of WTO rules set by the World Trade Organization, i.e. international law. Now, Downing Street say they were simply asking Lord Geidt whether or not this action would be in contravention of that law, and indeed, if that were the case, would it breach the ministerial code? It's very odd that Lord Geidt has sort of picked this issue as the one he will resign over, because as far as I understand it, the conversation over this particular trade measure took place last week. Indeed, many days before, Lord Geidt and the Prime Minister Boris Johnson had a conversation where Lord Geidt said on Monday in private to the Prime Minister that he would continue in his role through until the end of the year. So if Lord Geidt had had this ask of him, had been asked to adjudicate over a measure to protect British steel, and then several days later said, yes, I'll remain in your post, and then several days after that say, actually, I'm resigning, that raises some eyebrows. And what happened in between? Well, on Tuesday, Lord Geidt appeared before the PACAC Committee, the Constitutional Affairs Committee of the House of Commons, and had a bit of a rough ride there with members of Parliament from all sides of the House, sort of asking him the point of his job, asking him over various decisions. He looked visibly uncomfortable in that committee hearing, and maybe people are thinking that actually, maybe it was that appearance before that select committee, raking over various decisions, raking over not least Partygate, and indeed his multiple threats to resign as briefed out to the press over several months. Perhaps it's that actually pushed him over the line.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I think many are characterising this, aren't they, as the kind of straw that broke the camel's back, if you like. Though he did say, I think, that he only continued on after the Sugray report by a very small margin. How damaging then, Tom, is this for the Prime Minister? I mean, critics clearly pointing out this lunchtime that there have only ever been 4 ethics advisors to Prime Ministers and since 2006, and 2 of them resigned under Boris Johnson. It's not a good look, is it?
It's not a good look, certainly, although I think there are 2 things to say here. Number one, the role of ethics advisor to the Prime Minister is a relatively modern invention, something that came about under New Labour. John Major, Margaret Thatcher Ted Heath, Jim Callaghan, Wilson, none of them had ethics advisors. And to some extent, Number 10 are suggesting they may explore an alternate way in which the ministerial code can be interpreted. In his letter to the Prime Minister, Lord Geit said that he felt an enormous amount of pressure was placed upon him as an individual. There's a discussion now about whether or not a committee replaces that individual, some other body. But as to whether this damages the Prime Minister, I feel like a lot of this particular instance may well have been priced in to that vote only a couple of weeks ago. Many people expected this might happen.
Indeed, I agree on that. I did think at one stage, though, Tom, you've got to go back to Lord North and Sir Robert Walpole there on your list of Prime Ministers without an ethics advisor. Thank you very much, as always, Tom Harwood, joining us live from the Houses of Parliament. Let's move on to the other big story today, and that is that the Bank of England has hiked the base rate on interests to 1.25%. That is the highest in 13 years. The Bank's Monetary Policy Committee announced the decision on Thursday in a bid to temper rising inflation and tackle poor economic growth. It's the fifth rise in a row and takes the base interest rate from 1% to 1.25%. Inflation jumped to 9% in the 12 months up to April, 2% rise for March, and there are suggestions, more than suggestions, predictions that it will reach at least 11% before the end of the year. Let's speak to GB News' economics and business editor Liam Halligan, who's in the studio with us. Liam, first of all, many felt this decision was clearly necessary today. Question is, does it go far enough?
It was never a question of whether the bank's Monetary Policy Committee, the 9 economists, would raise rates today. It was always a question of by how much, Darren. They've raised rates by as little as they could have, really. A lot of people thought there'd be a 0.5% rise. It was only a 0.25% rise, as you just said.
Because the Feds, of course...
Indeed, the most important central bank in the world, the US Federal Reserve, raised interest rates by 0.75% yesterday in a bid to really bear down on inflation. Now, look, GB News viewers and listeners will know some of them will have variable rate mortgages. Many of them will have personal debts. Interest rate rises are painful, but most economists would agree that if you have to choose between a slowdown and inflation, you'd go for the slowdown because inflation is the worst evil. If inflation starts to get really high, and we're closing in on double digits, as you just indicated, the Bank of England is saying today that inflation will go up to 11% this autumn, as some of us have been predicting for some time, then if you start to get inflation expectations built in where everybody thinks prices will go up, so firms put their prices up, people bid for higher wages, you can then get to 15, 20% inflation. Investment then dries up. The cost of living crisis gets really, really bad because wages start to lag behind very, very seriously. So we're at the cusp of sort of bearable inflation now. So many people would say the Bank of England should have really gone for it and really crushed this inflation with at least a 0.5 percentage point rise, perhaps even more.
But why not, though? What's the thinking? What do you think the thinking is inside the MPC where they didn't go that far?
It's interesting. The MPC, the Monetary Policy Committee, you got the governor, Andrew Bailey. You've got a chunk of sort of internal Bank of England appointments. Then you've got the external appointments who are meant to be a bit more independent. And out of the 9 people, all 3 of the externals voted for a 50 basis point, as we say, a 0.5% increase, and the internals voted for a 0.25% increase. So the internals tend to be more cautious. There's a lot of groupthink at the Bank of England. You've been listening to me for a long time. I'd have raised interest rates last summer. Yeah. I've been saying since last summer.
And we've heard from Mervyn King and others who've been very critical.
Former governor of the Bank of England, very respected, saying that the Bank of England should have moved faster. So,
which is interesting, given the fact that obviously Andrew Bailey's very aware of, and other MPC members are very aware of the fact that there is criticism that they have not gone fast enough, that they're still not willing.
So they're obviously not stupid people. Yeah. They're obviously highly educated people. The reason they've been cautious is there are 2 reasons. One reason is that the economy has been slowing anyway. We had a preliminary GDP number out, gross domestic product, showing that the economy, or suggesting, and they can be revised, that the economy contracted in April as it contracted in March. There's also been a sense For many years now, pretty much since the global financial crisis, that stocks and shares and bond markets around the world, they've been kind of pumped up with printed money. They've been overvalued, bloated. And if you start lowering, if you start raising interest rates, then financial markets could correct, as we say in the jargon. They could, have a proper downward leg, a systemic collapse, which would obviously be a bit like 2008 and cause lots of problems everywhere. So there has rightly been some caution exercised in terms of not upsetting financial markets and not slowing down the economy unduly. But for my money, the Bank of England has underplayed their power today. They should have raised interest rates by more, in my view. And then the exchange rate comes into effect, Darren, because if the Bank of England is raising rates more slowly than the dollar, the US and other parts of the world, the pound weakens because they're not getting such a return on those pound investments. And if the pound weakens, and we've seen some weakening today, though admittedly in the last hour or so the pound's slightly regained some of that. But if the pound is weak, then our imports are more expensive. That pushes up inflation again. So I would have gone for a much bolder interest rate rise, and I think the Bank of England will come under some criticism in the days to come because of that.
And just for finding quickly, Liam, if you can, how high do we think these interest rates could go? And what impact on people's mortgages?
So we've gone from 0.1%, that was the low during the pandemic, and we're now at 1.25%.
Which is the highest, I think, for more than 10 years.
For 13 years. That's gone up in increments. But 1.25% is still really low by historic standards. The Bank of England's indicating, and the money markets are indicating, bets in financial markets, that we could go to about 2.5%, 3%. But even that would still be really, really low. When I took out my first mortgage in the mid-90s, interest rates were sort of 7, 8, 9, 10%. Now, the reality is that far fewer people are on variable rate mortgages than there used to be. About a quarter of all mortgages now are variable rate. That's not surprising because many people are fixed because interest rates have been so low. But it is still painful for those people involved. So I'd say to people, if you haven't already got a fixed mortgage, get your fix in now as soon as you can. And be mindful about not taking on too much personal debt, because I think it's pretty clear that interest rates, Darren, are going to go up quite a lot more before they start going down again.
OK. Liam Halligan, as always, a delight. Thank you very much indeed, our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan there. OK, you're watching GB News. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, we're going to be talking about defence spending and also about Russian sanctions and rail reforms as well ahead of those strikes next week. That and much more in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
OK, let's turn now to the Liberal Democrat MP and Treasury spokesperson. That's Christine Jardine, who joins us down the line. Christine, very good afternoon to you. Lots of politics around.
Good afternoon.
Politics never ends, does it? Let's focus, first of all, on Lord Geit's resignation. You know, in many... I mean, he hasn't resigned over Partygate. It doesn't seem like he has. And in many ways, that's made it more complicated. It's almost kind of let it's not had the effect, the desired effect, I think, the critics would have hoped when it comes to the Prime Minister's position.
I'm not sure quite what you mean by that, because what it has done is shown that the Prime Minister, frankly, seems to be a man who doesn't understand what ethics are. It seems to be a mystery to him. When, you know, for his own ethics advisor to say that, you know, what he was asked to do was basically to approve breaching the ministerial code. There's no criticism, actually, I think, that you can make of Boris Johnson now and his attitude towards the ministerial code and the ethics of office and things that really encompasses how frustrating, disappointed and just downright annoyed that the whole country is that we're getting this litany of, you know, just ethical disaster and, you know, morally bankrupt decision one after another. There seems to be no end to it.
No, but in saying that, you said the whole country's frustrated, but in large degree they're not, though. Isn't that the point? That, you know, lots of voters who voted for him, lots who didn't know he's not Mother Teresa. I don't think he's ever claimed to be, and that they are willing to accept whatever standards that he's willing to uphold to. As in, I don't think the whole country is frustrated. There's still a lot of people who quite like him out there, irrespective of these resignations.
Oh, I don't mean that you will not find people in the country, but what I mean is the general feeling in the country. When I am out talking to my constituents in Edinburgh West, when I'm talking to people down at Westminster, when, you know, I've been talking, I was down in Tiverton and Honiton the other week, and when I'm talking to people, they are frustrated that this is what is happening all the time. We are in the middle of an emergency, a cost of living emergency, an energy price emergency. We've just had a pandemic. There is a war in Ukraine, and the Prime Minister is a Prime Minister about whom there just seems to be this constant controversy and, you know, questions. And what we need is a Prime Minister who is above all of that. And there is a general feeling out there that this is just not good enough. And it's not just amongst the country. There's 148, possibly now more, Conservative MPs who felt that the time had come to move on. And I think that, you know, a lot of us are disappointed in them, that they didn't. They weren't able to persuade enough of their colleagues that the country just needs to move on, that we need someone else representing us abroad, someone else being the face of the British government, the voice of the British government, of the British people.
Let's turn on to the economy and interest rates and, of course, the cost of living crisis. I mean, do you think the Bank of England should have gone further today?
Well, I think what we've got now is nearly 250,000 people. I think what we've got now is an awful lot of people who are just going to find this a hammer blow to their their livelihoods, to their ability to pay their bills. The squeezed middle families in this country are going to be squeezed even further, and it should be a wake-up call to the government to bring in an emergency mortgage support fund for people, to look at what is happening to the millions of homeowners who are going to be dragged into financial despair by the interest rates going up. Now, I noticed someone said in the last segment that historically it's not that high, and yes, I remember when interest rates were in double digits, but that doesn't make that's no real consolation to families at the moment who are struggling, that this is going to be a massive hike for them. And I think what we need is for the government to act to relieve the pressure on family budgets, to cut VAT like we've been talking for a while. They need to act. The government needs to do something, and it needs to do something now.
But isn't the point? Well, I mean, the government clearly argued that they have done something, and that's undoubtedly true. I mean, and we know some of those payments are going to come through, literally cash payments, in the next couple of weeks. So I think it's unfair to say the government's done nothing. But Christine, I don't know if you were listening to Liam Halligan beforehand, though. He said the worst of all evils is inflation, and the fear is if you try and spend your way out of this, you're just going to make things worse. There has to be some economic pain.
When inflation was rising under Gordon Brown, he reduced VAT. And what we have said as Liberal Democrats is if VAT was reduced from 20% to 17.5%, that would make a vast difference to a lot of families across this country, and it would give them money to spend. And it does actually, that does bring down inflation, because when Gordon Brown did it, it brought inflation down from 4% to 3%. So why the government is not looking at doing something similar, I don't understand. We've been calling for this now for months. And you mentioned the payments that will go out next month. They're only £325. When families have lost £1,000, £200-300 isn't going to make that much difference. And other payments are waiting until October. The emergency is now. The cost of living crisis is now, and it's now that we need more action from this government.
OK, Christine Jardine, as always, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you. They're live from Edinburgh. Now, let's turn our attention to defence spending, because Brits continue, of course, to back the Western response in Ukraine. But few believe there should be an increase in defence spending. That's according to a new pan-European poll published by the European Council on Foreign Relations. Well, delighted to say, join me now is the Army veteran and Defence Policy Associate at the Henry Jackson Society, Robert Clark. Good afternoon, Robert. Interesting, this is only 1 in 4 Brits believing that we should be increasing defence spending.
Good afternoon. I mean, that figure is quite surprising, to be perfectly honest. 1 in 4. When we consider the amount of threats facing the world today, not just least, obviously, Russia and Ukraine, but a globally ambitious China, and we still have defence commitments around the globe. These commitments haven't just suddenly ended because the attention is on, understandably, Ukraine. So defence is facing really an unparalleled period in recent history where there's so many commitments that we must continue to undertake, but at the same time manage costs in an increasingly unstable world.
In saying that, I mean, Britain, I think, we don't know about the German plans at the moment, but they are the largest defence spender in Europe. Clearly, people feel that at the moment, given the cost of living crisis, that's fundamentally more important. They'd rather see money spent on things like trying to alleviate the cost of fuel.
I'm spending around £100 a week on fuel myself. I'm feeling it as much as anybody. I suppose one of the differences in my job is I see the actual day-to-day good in, for example, increased defence spending. We live in an age of defence austerity, I'm afraid. If we look at the historical decline in defence spending over the last 30 or 40 years, it's gone down from 7% of GDP to barely scratching 2% today. This is just simply not adequate anymore. Like I say, for the nature of the world that we live in, people really need to wake up to this reality of the situation. And it's so surprising that I'm having to say this, considering events in Eastern Europe only around 2,000-3,000 miles away. We have a European country that's been invaded, and millions of people are thrown into chaos. It's baffling that more people aren't supporting an increase in defence spending.
I get that, but the whole point is that we, up until at least relatively recently, we've had a very stable, peaceful time. I mean, lower defence spending surely is a good reflection of the times that we live in.
Oh, absolutely. In terms of, look, nobody wants to spend money on, for example, the military, which is geared towards, obviously, conflict. But the reality is, with Western conflict prevention, we spend a lot of money on two things, one of which is deterrence, which is our nuclear deterrence, which is very expensive, and alliance building. So, for example, our commitments under NATO, and these directly prop up and help support the governments in Ukraine, who I can't be too fine a point to say it, taking our fight and so far holding their own against Russia. So there's a lot to really unpack here. I fully understand the cost of living and inflation and people's concerns. I'm a normal person. I face these myself on a day-to-day basis. But the reality is we have to get real about defence spending. And just to put a final note on here, if I may, over the next 12 months, defence is actually going to be the only department of government that faces a day-to-day decline in spending. Its day-to-day budget is going to withdraw to about -2% from next year. So that's going to hit the military even harder.
OK, Robert, really appreciate your time and your insight this afternoon. Robert Clark there from the Henry Jackson Society joining us down the line. Thank you very much. You're watching GB News. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, we're going to be talking about Russian sanctions against journalists and MPs. We're going to be talking about those rail strikes due next week, the impact they could have on you. And also, after a couple of turbulent weeks in politics, what are the polls showing? How much of a dent has Boris Johnson taken? That and much more between now and 4. But first, let's head back over to Rhiannon for the latest news at just after 3:30.
Thank you, Darren. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Downing Street says Boris Johnson might not replace his ethics advisor. Number 10 says the Prime Minister's carefully reviewing the vitally important role after Lord Geit's surprise resignation yesterday. The ethics aide says he quit after being placed in an impossible and odious position over a plan to risk breaking the ministerial code. In his resignation letter, he described it as an affront, saying he could have no part in it. The Bank of England has increased interest rates from 1% to 1.25% as the cost of living continues to soar. It's the 5th consecutive rise, pushing interest rates to the highest level in 13 years. Inflation's currently at a 40-year high, and the bank's warned it could surpass 11% in October. The General Secretary of the RMT Union has accused the Transport Secretary of disgraceful threats to rail workers' livelihoods and right to strike. Mick Lynch says Grant Shapps should stop focusing on his own political ambitions and help reach a negotiated settlement on the dispute over jobs and pay. His comments follow Mr. Shapps calling next week's industrial action an incredible act of self-harm. The Prime Minister's spokesperson says continued crossings of the English Channel in small boats shows the need for the government's Rwanda policy. It says the Ministry of Defence confirmed 233 people reached the coast of Kent on half a dozen small boats yesterday. Almost 50 people have already been picked up in the Channel by the Border Force ship today. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound is 1.224 to the dollar. It's 1.172 to the euro. And the price of gold currently stands at £1,494.84 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Very good afternoon. Welcome back to the briefing here on GB News. It is 22 minutes to 4 o'clock on this Thursday afternoon. We're on TV, online and on DAB digital radio. Thank you very much indeed for your company. GB Views at gbnews.uk. Let's get in touch already. Adrian says, for the past few months, inflation and high petrol prices have led some to say it's been back, like being back in the 1970s. Well, hopefully not. William says Lord Geit, this is on Lord Geit, of course, who resigned yesterday, was made to look like he was totally incompetent and not even doing his job when he appeared in front of that select committee on Tuesday, and he needed to do something quickly to rebuild his reputation because he knew that another appearance would totally thrash his reputation. GB Views at gbnews.uk. Do get in touch. OK, let's turn to, as you can see, Russian sanctions there, because Russia has banned dozens of British journalists, media representatives and defence figures from entering the country in a move that Moscow said was a response to Western sanctions and the spreading of false information around and about Russia. 29 journalists and members of the British media, such as ones at the BBC and broadcaster Sky News, The Guardian and The Times newspapers, were personally banned. Well, joining me now is Gulnoza Said, who is from the Europe and Central Asia programme at the Committee to Protect Journalists. Very good afternoon to you, Gulnoza. Just first of all, your reaction to these sanctions, specifically against journalists, in many ways unsurprising.
Unsurprising. That's exactly the word I was going to use, because the decision to sanction British journalists earlier this week, and now a number of Australian journalists today, comes days after a number of Western governments sanctioned very high Russian government officials, including Putin's spokesperson Dmitry Peskov and the Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova. Immediately after that, Zakharova said she was going to talk to foreign correspondents working in Russia. And this policy is not new. Russia has been known for its tit-for-tat policies. Whenever Western governments do anything regarding Russia, the Russian government makes what they call symmetrical decisions, but in fact they are far more excessive, as we can see from these decisions to sanction British and Australian journalists. And I'm guessing that more similar decisions may follow.
But in many ways, of course, you know, these journalists will be fine, won't they? I'm sure many of them are not planning to go to Russia at any time soon. The concern are for two types of people. First of all, those journalists operating inside Russia. There's been an incredible clampdown on free press. Do we know about the situation for those journalists who are still trying to do their job properly inside Russia?
Look, Russian independent media is dead. Those who are still trying to work from inside Russia do so at risk of imprisonment and other forms of prosecution. And the imprisonment, especially if you report on the war in Ukraine, is lengthy. It's 15 years on the so-called fakes. Anything that the government doesn't like, anything that doesn't fall in line with the Kremlin-approved narrative of the events in Ukraine or in Russia may be considered fakes. And sanctioning foreign correspondents in Russia is going to make it very difficult for us, for audiences abroad, to get any credible information from inside Russia, because just as you pointed out, the crackdown has left many many regions of Russia in vacuum. We're not getting information. It's very difficult to get even official information, because if you're in the West, like myself, you cannot have access to many government websites to see the latest news or latest decisions. So yes, it's going to be even more difficult now to get any idea what is going on in Russia.
And just very finally, Gulnoza, there was a sense, wasn't there, I think a couple of decades ago, that journalists were pretty safe at large periods of time. Yes, maybe used by both sides in some conflict to propagate propaganda or whatever, but they were never deliberately targeted. But that does seem to have changed. Is that your sense?
It's exactly true. And it is true not only for foreign correspondents who have always been safer because Russia still wanted to maintain the relationships with foreign governments, but also true for some prominent media outlets that have survived previous crackdowns. And I'm talking about Echo of Moscow or Novaya Gazeta or Rain TV, but they didn't survive this crackdown because since Russia started the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February, we see that there is practically zero tolerance to anything that deviates from the Kremlin-approved narrative of the events.
OK, Gulnoza, really appreciate your time this afternoon, live from New York. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Gulnoza said there, who is from the Committee to Protect Journalists. Let's move back home now, because the Transport Secretary has said that season ticket holders caught up in rail strikes will be able to claim compensation, and made an 11-hour plea to workers not to follow what he calls the militant unions. Grant Shapps admitted that the 3-day walkout next week is going to cause misery, and said the strikes are an attempt to derail reforms that are critical and designed to inflict damage at the worst possible time. Well, joining me now on the show is the Conservative MP and Commons Transport Committee member, Greg Smith. Greg, good afternoon to you. These strikes are undoubtedly going to cause misery. Shouldn't Grant Shapps be speaking to the unions, trying to stop them from happening?
Well, it's a really difficult situation, because on one hand you've got the RMT saying they won't meet with a Tory government, and that's a direct quote from the union boss Mick Lynch. But also, of course, it's not the government that's the employer here, it's Network Rail and the different rail franchises. My appeal to anyone considering going on strike next week is we're in a really delicate place economically. We've got children, school pupils taking their GCSEs and trying to catch up with their education that will be caught out by these rail strikes. Think again, go back to the negotiating table, but don't inflict this social, economic and educational misery on the country at this very delicate time.
You say that, but of course, Grant Shapps is the Secretary of State. I get the fact that Network Rail and the franchises are involved in this, though, of course, we are moving effectively to a much more, in essence, nationalised system. I mean, Grant Shapps could change the game here. Why doesn't he, I get what the RMT are saying, but why doesn't he be better than the RMT and sit down and try, this is only going to be sorted through a compromise, a negotiated settlement, and try and get a deal done?
Negotiation is the key to this, but if the other side won't sit down at the table, if they want to make political points about not meeting with a, quote, Tory government, then there's very little the Transport Secretary can do from a negotiating standpoint. You can only negotiate if the other side are there to talk to you. I would be very much in favour of bringing in some of the laws that we talked about in our manifesto, that have been talked about in recent weeks, about trying to lock in a minimum service standard during any industrial action and seeing if we can trump the unions through legislation. But there is no way on earth you can pass that sort of legislation in time to stop the strikes next week. We are in an impossible situation here, with one side that seem absolutely determined to go on strike and inflict this economic, educational and social misery on the country, whilst at the same time making political points about not wanting to meet a Conservative government.
And maybe a government that, frankly, at the end of the day, wouldn't mind a bit of a row, a bit of a fight with the unions. It might be politically expedient for some inside Number 10.
I take the point, but at the end of the day, I can assure you that I'm yet to find any of my colleagues on the Conservative benches in Parliament that want these strikes next week, because we are all acutely aware of the misery it's going to bring. You go to the railway stations in my constituency at the start of the day and at the end of the school day, and loads of school children are getting on the trains to go to school in Aylesbury or Chesham or all over Buckinghamshire. This is going to cause real hardship to them, especially those pupils who, it's the most stressful time of their lives so far as they're preparing to sit their GCSEs. I do not want these strikes to happen, but I take the point that a rumble with the unions right now, might in some ways be politically expedient, but nobody wants it.
Let's move on, if we can, Greg, just to Lord Geidt. While we've got you, of course, his resignation yesterday. I'm sure you've seen his letters today. Your reaction to them? I mean, it's a pretty difficult letter to read, isn't it, for a Prime Minister who's lost not one but two ethics advisors in the space of essentially of a year?
It is difficult reading. Nobody can deny that. I find it also slightly confusing reading. I'm not really sure where steel subsidies comes into the debate that's been rumbling for the last few months in this country. But yeah, I take the point. It is difficult reading. It's never good for a Prime Minister to lose someone in that sort of position. But we've had the Metropolitan Police investigation, which resulted in one fixed penalty notice for the Prime Minister. We've had the Sue Gray report published. There's still the Privileges Committee investigation going on. Yes, this is difficult, but it's also slightly absurd the way steel subsidies have somehow come into it as well.
But isn't the truth, though, is that people, when it comes to measuring the kind of culture inside Number 10, or indeed the Prime Minister himself, is that there's a sense that standards have not been upheld, and that Boris Johnson has been pretty casual with kind of ethics around politics. And in the end, that's not likely to change.
Well, we've got the Privileges Committee, whose job it is in Parliament to look at these matters, yet to conduct their investigation and to report. So I don't think we should take the resignation of one official as the end of that story. We've got to wait to see what the Privileges Committee do independently and without fear or favour, and what they report into the Prime Minister.
But it's not. I mean, it's not just that. I mean, we've seen notable resignations, in recent weeks, including another czar. We've got 148 members of the Conservative Party who don't have confidence in the Prime Minister. What I'm trying to get at here is that there is a momentum. There's clearly a movement of people, slowly, possibly, but a continuous movement of people who feel that they can no longer either have confidence or work for the Prime Minister. It's not a great place to be, is it?
It's always difficult when someone resigns from post. But we had a vote in the House of Commons. We had a vote in the Conservative Parliamentary Party, which the Prime Minister won. I'm not going to try and pretend that 148 voting against him was anything other than an uncomfortable result, but he did win it. The results of the 1922 committee are that there cannot be another challenge for a year. And I'm very focused on wanting to see real change to affect the cost of living. I want to see big tax cuts down the line. We need to carry on supporting our friends in Ukraine. We need to get on with the big priorities that we were elected to do in 2019. And the longer the debate talks about a couple of resignations and those that are dissatisfied with the Prime Minister, the less chance we've got of actually delivering for all of our constituents. And so I would much rather we got on with that job, accepting the Privileges Committee are still doing their investigation. They are still going to make a report at some point later this year.
OK, Greg, really appreciate your time this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed for joining us there. Greg Smith down the line for us from Buckinghamshire. Thank you. Let's look at what the polls are saying in regards to all of this. Pretty turbulent couple of weeks in British politics. Joe Twyman is from Delta Poll and joins us down the line. Joe, good afternoon to you. Where are we at with all of this? Where has there been a significant impact in regards to the support for Boris Johnson, in regards to the Conservative Party support post that big confidence vote a couple of weeks ago?
Well, interestingly, Darren, no, there hasn't. What we've seen is that there was fluctuations ahead of the local elections, but since then, it's actually been relatively static. The lead that the Conservatives hold, the lead that Labour hold over the Conservatives has remained at between sort of 6 to 10 points, depending on which pollster you particularly choose. And Boris Johnson's own personal ratings have remained largely unchanged. Only about a quarter of people believe that he's doing a good job. And the reason that things have been pretty static, I would suggest, is because a lot of the problems that the Conservatives have faced and that Boris Johnson has faced particularly have, at least for the time being, been priced in. And in other words, people have made a decision. They've decided whether they think that what he did was right or wrong. They've decided that whether they think he's doing a good job or a bad job, and they're sticking to it. And that's why the polls up until this moment have remained constant. And it's going to be interesting to see if anything now over the next few weeks and months going into the summer can change things. I imagine that the by-elections next week have the potential to make a change, though even they may indeed not.
And what about Sir Keir Starmer? We don't talk about him enough, being branded as boring by someone in the shadow cabinet, and he's put a bit more welly into it. I mean, it's fair to say the British public haven't fallen in love with the leader of the opposition.
That's true. His ratings fluctuate around about net zero. And so, in other words, about as many people think he's doing a good job as think he's doing a bad job. And that may not sound great, but firstly, it's considerably better than Boris Johnson's position. And secondly, it's really difficult to judge given that Keir Starmer himself has been in quite an unusual situation, at least by historical standards. For the entire first couple of years of his leadership of the opposition, the country was, of course, wrapped up in the COVID pandemic. That made it very difficult for any political figure who was not in the government to make significant breakthroughs in terms of public awareness and attention. And even when he was given that opportunity, he, some would say very sensibly, did not simply adopt a position of opposition towards the government's policies, and indeed on many things, most notably vaccines, agreed wholeheartedly with at least the principle of what the government was doing. And so, yes, there have been criticisms he's made around things like track and trace, but there really wasn't the opportunity for him to get his broad policy agenda across. Now, with the emergence of the cost of living crisis, inflation, and fuel prices, and various other issues, he does have that opportunity, and that's what he's playing on. But it will take time.
Joe, as always, thank you very much, Joe Twyman there. Joining us down the line. Now in the studio, Colin Brazier, because he's on air in a couple of minutes' time. Colin, what's coming up between 4 and 6?
Well, I might go and change my jacket now. Neither of us got the memo today. No. Ironically, on the hottest day of the year so far, the air conditioning in the studio is working.
It's working. It's very chilly. Cool in here.
What stories we're doing, that's what we want to talk about. You're chatting just ahead on the Conservatives talking about the rail strike. Well, lots of the rail strike. Got Peter Hitchens coming in, the Daily Mail and Sunday, columnist, who actually has written that he thinks the unions are right. They've really got a point. They deserve more money. The real ruination of Britain's railways lies with successive Conservative and Labour governments. He looks back to a time when you could get on the Oxford to Paddington train, there'd be lovely buffet carriages and all the rest of it.
I know.
He's missed the point, Darren, which is that there are 10 million more people in this country in the last 20 years. Some of them filter onto the railways. Actually, the railways are carrying loads more people. something's got to give.
Well, we'll see. We'll join in and tune in for that discussion from 4. Colin, thank you. That's it from me for today and indeed this week. Have a nice weekend. Colin's up next. We'll leave you with the weather, and it's hot today, but my word, for most of us, it's going to be a hell of a lot hotter tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Hello. For much of England and Wales, the fine weather looks set to continue as we head through the rest of the working week. Plenty of sunshine, probably the peak of the temperatures as we head into Friday. But it will be cooler across Scotland and Northern Ireland with some rain heading in through the course of the day. If we look at the pressure pattern, then you can see high pressure very much dominating across the UK. That's what's brought all the fine weather over the last few days. But it is migrating its way eastwards, and as that happens, we drag in some very warm hot air from the south as we head into Friday. Through the rest of Thursday, then, into the evening and overnight, plenty of cloud across the UK, but most places will be dry with some clear spells. But it's a different story across Scotland and Northern Ireland, with heavier, persistent rain spreading in from the Atlantic as we head through the night. A strengthening breeze here as well, and it won't be a particularly warm night in the north, 12 to 14 degrees, but across England and Wales, another fairly warm, muggy night to come. Temperatures in places not dropping below 17 or 18 degrees Celsius. As we start Friday, then, for most of England and Wales, it's a dry start. Variable amounts of cloud, but that will break to give increasing amounts of sunshine, I think, through the day. Again, a different story for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Here we see outbreaks of rain continue to slowly push its way southeastwards. Some of that rain again could be on the heavy side. To the north of that rain band, it will be a fairly cool afternoon to come. But look at these temperatures across England and Wales, widely into the high 20s or low 30s. In the southeast, we could see 33.